Dr. Denise Natali, former Assistant Secretary of State, Bureau of Conflict and Stabilization Operations. You are most welcome on the Capital TV show. We are here on the University Club. I'm going to start asking you about the Kurds. You are so interested in the Kurds case, and you have written books about it, and you helping and supporting the people of Kurdistan. Can you tell us more?
Certainly, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. I've started working on the Kurdish issue when I first visited the Kurdistan region in 1992, after the Gulf War, and that was following seeing about 2 million Kurdish people, refugees, in the mountains after they, had an uprising, and so there were different efforts. I was in Washington doing the Gulf relief effort, and then I was curious about the Kurds because there wasn't really much written about the Kurds at that time other than, Kurds as tribes. And that began my relationship, if you will, or engagement with the Kurds in the Kurdistan region, where I worked for the U.S. Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, where we provided humanitarian assistance to the Kurds and help them to return to their homes after that. And it has been, and that was part when we had the safe haven and the no-fly zone. So it was part of our efforts as a government to stabilize the region. And that, has gone back and forth or continued for about 30 years now. And I've written a couple of books on the Kurds and, some engagements on the different regions as well.
You just returned from Turkey, the track 2 dialogue. The government of Turkey wants to return 1 million refugees to Syria. What are the consequences of this?
Yes. Turkey, to start with, the Syrian civil war, which is over 11 years old now, resulted in a mass refugee populations of over 6.7 million in the region. Turkey, the government of Turkey, has assumed the lion's share of that at about 3.7 million and change. Refugees, Syrian refugees, have gone to Turkey. Turkey is now the largest has the largest refugee population in the world. So, unfortunately, and you don't see this just in Turkey, these refugee communities have been received backlash. There are some opposition groups. There's going to be a forthcoming election that are blaming these communities for taking jobs, for fueling the economic downturn. You've seen this elsewhere. So. There have been some groups calling for them to return. Now, my understanding, President Erdogan has said there is under no conditions will these communities be forcibly returned to Syria. This is a voluntary option. There's been houses built in Idlib in Syria. Now, the numbers range from the UN numbers are about 130,000 have returned. Turkey says about 500,000 have returned. But this will be a challenge. So that's what the proposal is. But, it's very difficult to get refugees anywhere to return to their home countries when it's still at war, when there's great instability, when they fled for the very reasons that they don't want to return to. So this is, in my view, a big challenge is to get communities to want to return. But again, the larger question is at what point can Turkey aim to stabilize or normalize relations with Syria so that other development opportunities can continue? And they're a way off.
We want to know what did you do during your tenure about the war in Yemen? How did you establish an effort or a collaboration or cooperation with the Saudis and the Emiratis to bring stability to Yemen?
Thanks. Yeah. Part of the work of my bureau while I was at the State Department, again, was to focus on stabilization and not only preventing conflict, but stabilizing conflict-ridden societies. Yemen was a place where we had programs and where we worked to help that project. We worked closely, yes we did, with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Development and Reconstruction Program in Yemen was one of the people and the groups that we worked closely with through training. But largely it was working with regional partners, very important, critical regional partners to to look at the conflict and say, how can we best stabilize parts of this war-torn country? So, I had the opportunity to travel to southern Yemen. I went to Makhala. And, one of the, I guess it was surprising, or I shouldn't have been surprised, but Makhala was very different than other parts of Yemen. Let's say Hudaydah, where you read that it was unstable and war-torn. And in this part of Yemen that I visited, we visited with the governor, but there was a lot of positive Saudi support from Saudi Arabia. There were students all Yemeni people that had received scholarships that were in Saudi Arabia, work visas, tribal connections, joint hybrid security forces. Saudi Arabia, and just recently had, contributed about $3 billion in financial support to the Yemeni economy with UAE. So all of these degrees of support. And then, of course, there was reconstruction projects, there were humanitarian assistance. All this level of support, we found I can't, from where I sat, see how any part of Yemen could have been stabilized, this part of it, without the engagement of a key regional actor who shares over 1,300 kilometers of border with Yemen. So we had important training opportunities with the Saudi.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the U.S.-Saudi relationships improved since the visit of His Royal Highness Prince Khalid bin Salman? What is expected from this visit?
I can't comment on the visit and how quickly things can and hopefully turn, but I can say, again, in my view, in the work that I've done and what I continue to do, in terms of how do we best assure regional stability, and in my view, we do it through our traditional security, very important security partners, Saudi Arabia obviously being one of them. I can't imagine working with the region, particularly as the United States pursues a policy of restraint and not working closely with Saudi Arabia and, of course, our other Gulf Cooperation Council partners. Mm-hmm. So hopefully this meeting will lead to more enhanced security cooperation with Saudi Arabia. And again, how do you push forward with resolving or keeping, let's say, the ceasefire in Yemen going? We have a lot of diplomatic efforts on that part, and I can't see doing it without our very important relationship with Saudi Arabia.
Is it fair to say that the U.S. administration right now is not a reliable party or ally for UAE especially? And I know that you said there's been continuity rather than radical change in U.S. strategy. We continue to rely on alliances and regional partners for military and intelligence. How do you describe the cooperation with UAE on this matter?
And I know there's been, some statements about it, downturning a bit. But I said, let me start with the second part, which is where I see there's been continuity, and I do. And that is in the sense of the way that this administration, I'm not speaking for this administration, I speak for my own views, but and the previous administration, the Trump administration, pursued, again, policy of restraint. And some people can say, this is more offshore balancing, or it's a different form of realism. But whatever that may be, the current administration is not engaging in liberal interventionism. They are not nation building and pursuing the types of social engineering, democracy promotion projects that were part of the liberal interventionist mode a few administrations ago. So when I said I saw a continuity, I see some of the approach of the Trump administration to focus on our targeted national security interests, to again pursue a policy of restraint, and we must rely on our partners and our regional partners and alliances to do so. And do I think the UAE is a critical partner? Absolutely, of course, a very important security partner. We have over $29 billion in foreign arms sales to the UAE. We rely on the UAE for its ports and security cooperation, and it can go on and on and on. Intelligence sharing, counter-terrorism efforts. when we pursue.
And creating stability in the Middle East.
Of course, in creating stability. Again, one of the important aspects of the time I was in southern Yemen was there was important counterterrorism efforts going on as well. And that was being led by the UAE. So to think if we're going to pivot, and we have pivoted to China, into Asia, the Pacific, and, you know, we haven't pursued isolation in the Middle East, but if we are pivoting, we need to rely on these very important regional allies and partners, not just partners or allies, like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, to stabilize the region, because we have stepped back a bit and allowed our regional partners to take the lead.
You said must start the stabilization while war is ongoing to help with peace. Sequencing is vital. For example, we need to identify who are the reconciliables from members of militia. Do you think Hezbollah is a militia in Lebanon and the army?
Let me start with the first part of the question. Absolutely militia, absolutely a terrorist group, absolutely destabilizing to the region. You know, one of the Iran proxy groups in the Middle East that has now come to have, you know, political, this is beyond being a non-state armed group now. You're talking about trends that are occurring not just in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Yemen, in other parts of the world where there are fragile states and failed governance. Militia groups have come to take over political, socio-economic networks. They're deeply embedded, and they are challenging the functions of the state, if you will. So yes, is Hezbollah? Absolutely. However, the source of the problem, and I see the problem now being one of, these are now hybrid groups. They're going to be part of the political landscape for years to come, because they're linked to fragile and failed states. So where you're going to see states that are weak, where you're going to see governance that is weak, you're going to find these types of militia groups that are having field day, monopolizing certain parts of the country. And so that's when I talk about stabilizing and we talk about sequencing. Stabilization is not just something you start and you say, okay, the war's over, let's start, let's do it now. Where are the parts of the country that are more amenable to stability? Because, again, if you look at Syria and Yemen and parts of Iraq,
you said local leadership is indispensable during the time of crisis. So
yes, it is. Local leadership is. Locally legitimate partners. If you look at the stabilization strategy that we helped devise with our interagency partners, one of the principles is having locally legitimate actors, that this has got to be locally driven, or else you're not going to have any sustainable, peace. So who are these locally legitimate actors?
Elections in Lebanon, how do you see the future of this country?
I see the future is going to be like it was for the last many years, a very fractured. Lebanon is a very weak and fractured country in which a quota system continues to define the way that politics is being run. Until people can say we've had enough with Hezbollah, we have a strong government that can provide the types of services that we want, then maybe you could see some of these groups dissipate. But the fact of the matter is, and this is the challenge of non-state armed groups, people using the word hybrid groups, is they are also service providers now, right? They're also ones that are negotiating disputes or providing, judicial settlements. And this is where some say they can be working alongside or replacing the functions of the state.
What would you say on Iran's promoting terrorism?
What do I say? When the sky's blue, we can say the sky's blue. And it's the largest sponsor of state-sponsored terrorism in the world, and that continues. And that continues alongside the opportunities provided by weak states in the neighborhood to export this terrorism, right, through its militia groups in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, and as a way of asserting, control of the region.
Why the Biden administration is still negotiating with this regime and indirectly?
The JCPOA was flawed from the outset. The JCPOA that's being negotiated right now essentially is trying to revive the first JCPOA, which was already flawed. But flawed in the sense, particularly, particularly because it never addressed, as you know, Iran's ballistic missile program, and it never addressed the malign militia group activity. So if I don't know how anybody could expect different behavior when we're going back to using the same flawed agreement that didn't address these problems in the first place. With that said, there are some regionally led efforts by the government of Iraq to sponsor. Now it just sponsored its 5th dialogue with Saudi Arabia and Iran. This is extremely important and useful so that some of these regional issues that were not included in the JCPOA can be addressed. Yemen, Iran-backed militia groups, to the extent to which this will succeed is a different story. But then let me just answer. I don't think that the Biden administration, the Trump administration, another administration can be solely responsible for removing these militia group activities at this point. Like I said, they are in sync with a failed state.
Dr. Denise Natali, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you for being with us at the University Club. Thank you for everything you said.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Hey, Maria Malouf here. Please click to like and subscribe to Maria Malouf TV YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.